Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today wearing my Kurt Vonnegut t-shirt to do a Friday Reads video and wrap up the week in reading. I finished 2 books this week. I have another one ongoing and I'm just about to start another one. If you would like to skip to the part of the video where I talk about the books that I have read, you may do so. There will be a timestamp down below. You're going to miss a conversation about the National Book Award and the Lifetime Achievement Award that they are going to be giving out, as well as some exciting Maggie O'Farrell news and what have you. But you have the option of doing that, skipping to the Friday Reads portion of the video. I am actually filming this on Thursday because it's going to be a bit of a crazy weekend for Joel and I, so I figured this was my best opportunity to get a Friday Reads video filmed. So here I am. The things I want to talk about before we get to the Friday Reads portion of this video are, first of all, the National Book Award. We're getting very close to the announcement of the long list for this year's, all of their different categories. I was going to say the fiction prize. That's the one I focus on for probably obvious reasons. However, they do also have categories for nonfiction, young people's literature, poetry, and translated literature. I have fun following the National Book Award, and we should be getting the long lists next Friday. Well, by next Friday. What they usually do is stagger them out, and on their website, it doesn't say which ones are going to be announced when, which is a little bit annoying. But what they have usually done is they'll end with the fiction prize. So the announcements are going to be, let's see if I can find it on the dates, Tuesday, September 9th through Friday, September 12th. And Friday is usually the day that we get fiction, and the others are sort of doubled up. So we could get poetry and nonfiction on one day. We could get young people's literature and translated literature on another day, but usually fiction is the last category that is announced. So I'm guessing that we're going to get the long list on Friday, and I'm hoping that I will be able to film a video reacting to that long list on Friday. So I might be looking at another Thursday film for my Friday Reads video just to make sure that that goes up. But that's exciting, and that is coming, and then we'll be getting the shortlist for the Booker Prize on September 23rd. So a lot is happening in the world of book prizes. They also just announced the Bailey Gifford long list, if that is your thing. So what I wanted to mention, in addition to just giving you a heads up that this is something that is going to be coming, we are going to get the long list next week, and I'm hoping to do a reaction. They typically give out a Lifetime Achievement Award at the National Book Award Festival, at least one. And the Literarian Award, which is the one that they have just announced, is going to Roxane Gay. And I think that feels correct. I have only read one Roxane Gay book, and I don't remember the name of it. It's the one that has the fork on the cover. If you're a Roxane Gay fan, you probably know what that is. Actually, let me see. Hunger. I believe it's Hunger. I have wanted to read Bad Feminist. I've heard great things about An Untamed State, which is her novel. That one I eventually unhauled because it is also supposed to be really difficult to read. It's about a woman who is kidnapped and held for ransom, and the things that are done to her while she is in captivity, I'm sure you can imagine, are not great. Roxane Gay is also a very outspoken person, and I know there are a lot of people on BookTube who are a huge fan. I am generally a fan. Like I said, I've only read one of her books, so, it's hard to call yourself a fan when that's the level of experience you have. Here's what they say about Roxane Gay. As a writer, professor, editor, and cultural critic, Roxane Gay has intentionally and artfully carved out spaces to create opportunities for writers, readers, and emerging publishing professionals of all backgrounds in the literary world, and we will continue to reap the benefits of her achievements for generations, said David Steinberger, chair of the board of directors of the National Book Foundation. It is an honor to recognize Roxane Gay's extraordinary contributions to the literary community at the 76th National Book Awards ceremony this November. And it also says she was born in Omaha, which I did not know. But there it is. So that is the first thing I wanted to talk about, and I will have a link to the announcement from the National Book Foundation down below. I am not doing a prediction about what will be on the National Book Award long list for fiction. I had been thinking that it would make sense for Susan Choi to be back on the long list. She won for Trust Exercise, which was her last book, but Flashlight is on the Booker Prize long list. And usually there's at least one book that crosses over on the long list between the National Book Award, sometimes even the short list, and the Booker Prize. So it's possible that it will be there, but we will ultimately have to see what will happen there. What I like about the National Book Award in particular is that it's really good at diversity. It has a diverse range of authors and stories, and it usually has a pretty good mix between books that you would expect to see on a long list, like things that have been really touted and have become the biggest books of the year, and some books that will be discoveries. And if you know me, you know I love using a long list as a tool of discovery to help me find books that I might have overlooked. So the National Book Award is usually good for that. Audition by Katie Kitamura is another book from the Booker Prize long list that I would really not be surprised to see pop up on the long list for the National Book Award for fiction. Let me see. I have a short list of Pulitzer possibilities. Let me just take a quick look at that. The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. It will be really interesting to see if that one lands on the long list, because when On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous came out, it seemed like that was a book that was going to have a lot of momentum heading into end of year prizes and best of lists, and then it just didn't end up appearing. So it will be interesting to see if the same thing happens to The Emperor of Gladness, and this will be a good test case about whether or not that's going to happen again. I think Isola by Allegra Goodman, that feels like a pretty solid contender for the National Book Award for fiction. And we could see The Girls Who Grew Big by Layla Motley, Minor Black Figures, Brandon Taylor, which is not out yet, Amity by Nathan Harris, and maybe A Guardian and a Thief by Megha Majumdar. And People Like Us, Jason Mott is also a previous winner, and it sounds like that is a book that has done some really interesting things, reckoning with being a winner of the National Book Award. So that would be a really fascinating inclusion. And of course, I would love to see Blackwood's Blue Sky by Eowyn Ivey. That is a book that is among my favorite of the year. It's really just fantastic. So if you have thoughts about what should be there, what you think will be there, let me know in the comment section down below. I don't like to do a firm prediction, but I do think within the titles that I've mentioned, there are some pretty good contenders in there. The next thing to talk about before we get to the actual Friday Reads portion of the video is just that this morning, as I'm filming this, Thursday, September 4th, Maggie O'Farrell announced that she has a book coming out on June 2nd. It's called Land, and I am really excited. It's almost funny how excited I am about this one, because I am a huge fan of Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And I love that book. I'm so excited about the film adaptation. The trailer for the film adaptation came out last week, and I talked about it in my Friday Reads video. But I really didn't like The Marriage Portrait very much. I have a standalone review of it. I'll link it down below. And you would think that my lack of enthusiasm for The Marriage Portrait would make me more hesitant about a new Maggie O'Farrell book. I think under ordinary circumstances that might be the case. I think it's just that my love for Hamnet is making me excited. I am optimistic that I can get that feeling from Maggie O'Farrell again. And I think it's also getting caught up in the impending release of the film adaptation of Hamnet. The timing of this is really working for me, because I'm so excited to see the movie adaptation of Hamnet, possibly reread Hamnet, and now the announcement that we are getting another book is just, it's sending me. That is what it's doing. Now, I will have a link down below. I will have links to all of the books that I talk about. Well, maybe not some of the National Book Award contenders that I throw out, but most of the books that I talk about, I'll have links down below. Those will take you to bookshop.org. there is already a page on Bookshop for Land by Maggie O'Farrell. You can go there and pre-order the book if you would like. And if you would prefer, you can pre-order through your local independent bookstore. It's always a good thing to do. And you can support your local library. Odds are they will not have this book in their system right now, but you could recommend it for purchase, and then you can borrow it from them. Supporting your local library is always a good thing to do. But in the meantime, I'll have a link down below if you want to pre-order through bookshop.org. Here is the description of this book. Maggie O'Farrell, the award-winning best-selling author of Hamnet and the Marriage Portrait, returns with a soaring historical novel set in Ireland in the years before and after the Blight. On a windswept peninsula stretching out into the Atlantic, Tomas and his reluctant son, Liam, are working for the Great Ordnance Survey project to map the whole of Ireland. The year is 1865, and in a country not long since ravaged and emptied by the Great Hunger. The task is not an easy one. Tomas, however, is determined that his maps will be a record of the disaster. The British soldiers in charge are due to arrive any day, expecting the work to be completed, but Tomas is unexpectedly sent off course by an unsettling encounter in a copse. His life and those of his family will never be the same again. Liam is terrified by the sudden change in his taciturn father. What was it that caused such cracks to open in Tomas, and how is Liam, aged only 10, going to finish the mapping and get them both home? Land is a novel about separation and reunion, tragedy and recovery, colonization and rebellion. It is a story of buried treasure, overlapping lives, ancient woodland, persistent ghosts, a particularly loyal dog, and how when it comes to both land and history, nothing ever goes away. As spellbinding and various as the landscape that inspired it, Land is, above all, the story of survival for our times and for all times. And I think another thing that's really making me so excited about this book is that description. You know, a story about the Great Hunger in Ireland and reckoning with the colonization of Ireland and the attempt to stamp out Irish identity. You know, that is something that I had been learning about before Joel and I went to Ireland and have continued to be really interested in. So having Maggie O'Farrell reckon with those things is speaking to my soul. I think I'm really interested in this book, and hopefully you will be too. Let's move to the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. As I said, I finished 2 books this week, and one of them I've already talked about in the video that Joel and I did wrapping up the month of August, because I managed to finish Justice by Larry Watson right at the end of August. I picked it up over the weekend and managed to finish it on the 31st of the month and talked about it in that wrap-up, which will be linked down below. You may remember I am a huge fan of Montana 1948, which is a novella by Larry Watson that I read last year. And if you're doing Shorty September, Montana 1948 would be a really great addition to your library. It gives me essences of small things like these, but in a very Western American setting, and I really loved it. So the premise of Montana 1948, which is important for Justice, is that our protagonist is 10 or 11 years old in 1948 in Montana, and this is described as him from the closer to the present at least, looking back on that summer and understanding that it was the linchpin in his journey into adulthood. It was sort of his coming of age. It's when he left the veil of childhood behind. And that is done because his father is the sheriff. His grandfather was the sheriff. So there's a proud history in this town in which they live. But they find out that his uncle, who's a doctor in the town, has been doing bad things, and now they have to decide whether or not to stand up for what is right in the community. It's a really great book. So the reason that is so important to Justice is that these are a collection of stories about the people from Montana 1948. So the only character from Montana 1948, well, I guess there are 2 characters from Montana 1948 that you don't really get the perspective of. And that is the protagonist of Montana 1948, the boy who is 10 or 11, although he does appear in some of the stories as an infant. and the doctor, the uncle. He appears a lot more often, but you don't really get a story that is told from his perspective. But everybody else, the father who becomes the sheriff, the little boy's mother who marries into this family, the grandmother who also married into this family, the grandfather who was the sheriff before and created this family legacy. You get stories that are all about the people from Montana 1948. I do think that Justice can function as an independent story collection, but I think your experience of the book will be a lot more profound and deeper if you have read Montana 1948 first. Because the first story alone deals with questions of family legacy and proximity to justice and whether or not you can evade justice and the tiers of justice that can exist in a society. And I don't really want to say more about that without spoiling the first story, but you can get all of those themes, but if you have read Montana 1948, you see the way they are going to continue to echo for this family. And that packs more of a punch. So I really enjoyed this book. I would be curious to read more by Larry Watson. These are the only two books that are within this. Well, he actually has another book that is set in the town of Bent Rock, Montana, which is where these two books are set. So but I believe it's set later. There's a different sheriff. So I'm imagining that it comes later on than when these two books are set. So yeah, there's a connection to these stories, I'm assuming, based on the town that is used as a setting, but there isn't any specific connection to these two books. But I would be very curious to read more of his work. If you have read other Larry Watson books, please let me know if you have a recommendation for where I should go next. So that was the first book that I finished. The second book that I finished was The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. And you may remember last week I had been struggling to get through The Land in Winter. And I think taking the weekend off to read Justice turned out to be just the trick. When I picked it back up on Monday, I made a huge amount of progress. I read like 100 pages of the book. It was a holiday in the United States. So I made a good head of progress. And I admit I did have a bit of a lull on, I think it was Tuesday. I barely even picked it up. But then Wednesday, I really powered through a lot of it, and then I finished it this morning as I'm filming it. So I'm going to save my thoughts for the most part for another specific video reviewing one of the books that is on the Booker long list. I'll link the other two that I have done so far. What I will say here is that I am sort of wondering if I should give up on the Booker books. I've never really been a person who will drop everything and read a long list, but for some reason, the Booker long list just captured my attention. And maybe there's also an element of the novelty of it because it's not something I would usually do. And I never wanted to do all of the Booker long listed titles, but I will say I haven't really had a great time with them so far. I still want to, I have one of them from the library. We'll talk about that one in a second. So I am going to keep going, but I am having the thought that I should probably give up and not prioritize this because there are other things that I would really like to read. So I think how much further I go will depend on how this next Booker book goes. But I am already having the feeling that, do I need to put such an emphasis on these books when I don't feel like I'm getting much out of the experience? Should I break free and go in another direction? Now, I will say, having said that, so I have one of the books from the library, but I am absolutely hoping to read The Loneliness of Sonia and Sonny by Kieran Desai when that is released on September 23rd. And I will have access to the audio of that book. So I think that's the way I'm going to consume that. But so I definitely want to read that one. And let me pull up the whole long list so we can see exactly where I am at in terms of this. Okay. So, Misinterpretation, can't really find my copy of that book. And at this point, it's been very mixed feedback, so I think I'm going to let that one go. Sea Scraper by Benjamin Wood sounds interesting, but not enough that I feel like I would go out of my way to get it before it's released in the United States. Flesh by David Zaloy is the book that I have from the library. Endling by Maria Riva. I do want to read it, but I'm also thinking maybe I don't want to prioritize that book right now because I have heard some sort of mixed things about it. And The Rest of Our Lives by Ben Markovitz, I feel pretty confident I can just leave that one alone based on the reviews of it that I have seen so far. I have already done Audition by Katie Kitamura. I do definitely want to read The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny. I'm sort of feeling like I don't really need to get to Flashlight by Susan Choi at this point based on the feedback that I have seen about it. I haven't seen too much about One Boat by Jonathan Buckley. I am even more confident now than I was when the long list was announced that I don't want to read Universality by Natasha Brown. I've already read The South. I would be interested in reading Love Forms, but I think that is a book that is really a lot is going to depend on my reading of Flesh, if I do Endling, and The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny. But yeah. So that's sort of my thoughts about how I will proceed right now. We're going to see how I get along with, I'm just going to hold it up because I'm talking about it now. So we'll see how I get along with Flesh by David Zaloy. I already picked it up this morning after I finished The Land in Winter, and I have gotten 10 pages in. People had warned me that the prose is very, it's almost blunt, short sentences, very declarative, and that's sort of the way the book goes, and I absolutely can see that already. So we'll see how it goes. I don't really want to say anything until I'm further in, but yeah, we'll see what happens with Flesh by David Zaloy. That will be my next book. In the meantime, I had gotten access to the audio of Signal Fires by Danny Shapiro last week, the day that I filmed my Friday reads, and I had listened to one chapter of the book at that point. Over the weekend, including Monday, because again, it was a long weekend in the United States, I did not listen to the audio at all. It's just, if you follow along, you know, I haven't been listening to my audiobooks over the weekend. And then when the week comes, I make good progress. So I'm 25% of the way into the audio of Signal Fires right now. And I'm really intrigued by it. I think Danny Shapiro is a great writer, and I can't wait to see where this story goes. So the first chapter is set, I believe, in the late 1980s. Let's find out. Mid-1980s. It's August 27th, 1985. So you have a brother and a sister who are teenagers in a car with a friend who is riding with them. Theo, the brother, is driving, and he ends up crashing the car into a tree. And the passenger, the friend, dies. And again, this is the first chapter, not a spoiler. It's on the back of the book, too. And the sister, whose name is Sarah, I believe. I'm trying to skim the back of the book. It doesn't say. I believe her name is Sarah. She gets out of the car and tells her parents that she had been driving. So she takes the blame for the accident. And then it jumps to 2010. Sarah and Theo are now adults, about 40 years old. And their parents have gotten older, and there's a new family, or maybe not a new family. They've been living across the street, but the father of the family becomes familiar with Waldo, who's a young boy, about 10 or 11 years old, who is living in that house and who loves constellations and the stars and feels bad about it because his father keeps telling him that this is a waste of time, that he should be doing other things, and he's not meeting his father's expectations for who he should be. So then the father meets Waldo, and they have this really sweet and tender moment and conversation about constellations and looking at them together. And we also get to know where Sarah and Theo are now, and a little bit of where their mother is now. And it's a lot. It's a very difficult book to explain or describe, at least succinctly, because there's a lot going on, and I'm trying to keep going without knowing too much about where it's going. I am sort of anticipating that we're either going to time jump again or maybe jump back further into the past at some point, but I don't know if that's going to be the way it goes, if we're just going to stay in 2010 from henceforth. But I'm really enjoying this book so far, and I'm hoping that in the next 75% of the audio, it doesn't fall apart, because I'm really enjoying it. And I think Dani Shapiro is a fantastic writer. She has great observations, and she has that sort of tender style of writing that really speaks to me. So I'm looking forward to getting further into this book. And I don't know, because again, like I said, starting tomorrow, which is for me is Friday, it's just going to be a crazy weekend. So even more so than usual, I'm anticipating that I won't get a lot of audio time, but we'll find out. So that is everything that I'm reading right now, and I'd love to hear what you've been up to, what you've been reading, watching, loving, hating, all of that stuff. And again, let me know what you think might be on the Booker Prize long list for fiction and all of that good stuff. As always, I really appreciate your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.